Hiya folks, and welcome back to the Gosforth Handyman Tips Library. Have you ever wanted to hang something incredibly heavy on the wall, like stupidly heavy, and you've not been sure what sort of fitting to use? Well, enter the world of wall bolts. So wall bolts are an expanding metal fixing designed for holding incredibly heavy loads in solid walls. This is pretty much the heaviest duty mechanical fixing I would generally use. Great for things like hanging really heavy radiators on walls, really heavy TVs with big cantilever brackets. They get known by quite a few different names just to confuse you. So Rawlplug called them Rawlbolts, Screwfix called them shield anchors, and Fisher called them wall bolts, and I've always known them as wall bolts. As I say, only for solid walls. They're no good for plasterboard or wood walls or anything like that. They're designed for going into things like brick, concrete, block walls, basically anything solid. And you can use them on dot and dab walls as well, but you need some way of bridging the cavity between the plasterboard and the actual block. So either a spacer or like a plastic spacer or a wooden spacer, but you just need to take that into account, that otherwise you're going to crush the plasterboard when you tighten the bolt, and you've got to tighten them fully. You can't just leave them half tight, they'll not work. These particular ones that I'm going to be testing are Screwfix's own ones. They get called Shield Anchor Bolt type M8 by 60 millimeters. So they're 60 millimeters long. That is the entire length of the thread. The actual fitting itself is a little bit shorter than 60 millimeters. The plug bit is pretty much 50 mil, but you would drill a 60 mil hole so that the bolt can penetrate all the way through, so that when you tighten it, the bolt's not hitting the wall at the end. And these particular ones need a 14 millimeter hole in the wall. So you're almost certainly going to need an SDS drill for this, especially if you're going into concrete or brick. If you're going into block like thermalite blocks or medium density blocks, you can probably get away with a normal combi drill. But as I say, it is a fairly beefy hole that you're going to need for these. As per usual, I'll include a link in the description to everything that I'm using here. The way they work is really straightforward. There's basically a threaded metal part in the end of the fitting, and it's got a chamfer on it, so that when you tighten it up, it pulls that metal part into the rest of the fitting. So it can't do anything but get wider and wider and wider. Trust me, once these are tightened up, these are incredibly strong. Way beyond what I can test on my test rig. So you're talking, I've had a quick look into the specs of some of the fittings. I can't find specs for these particular ones, but I've seen some of the ones that can take well over half a ton on a single fixing. And that's axial load as well. It can take much more on a shear load. Obviously, if you want to sleep easy at night, I wouldn't advise putting half a ton on one single fitting, but that is just what the specs happen to say. In terms of tools you're going to need, obviously we've got the SDS drill that I was talking about with a 14 mil bit. We've got the actual wall bolts. I've got my impact driver because that is quite handy for putting the bolts in nice and quick. Using a 13 mil socket on the end. I've also got a ratcheted socket as well, it helps to kind of get a better idea of the tightness of the bolt when you're putting it in. Again, obviously a 13 mil socket on the end of that. I would suggest, if you're doing these sort of fittings for any sort of industrial application, for example like handrails in schools or anything that's a bit more than just domestic use, I would suggest you use a proper torque wrench, because there are specifications for example, the Fisher branded ones in terms of the torque that you should use on these when you're putting them in. I generally just make them comfortably tight. Because I've got no solid walls in my workshop, or certainly none that I would trust putting these into, because my workshop's only single leaf brick and I don't want to literally pull the wall down. I'm just going to demonstrate these going into a concrete floor, but it's exactly the same principle whether you're going into a floor or a wall or even concrete ceilings as well. It's the same principle. So X marks the spot. We're going to go in here. So I'm going to set the depth gauge on my drill to the length of the entire length of the threaded bit, if that makes sense. So from that end all the way up to just below the bolt. And to be honest, there's no harm in just adding on an extra 5mm anyway, just in case there's any like debris that falls down while you're actually tightening the bolt. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the depth gauge for the entire depth of the bolt, all the way from the head. They're not particularly accurate, these anyway, because obviously the bit's doing that when it's going in anyway. So, but obviously the key thing is that you don't want that bottoming out in the end of the hole, because if that bottoms out, then when you're tightening it, you're going to end up with a gap at the top that you probably don't want. It depends what you're attaching, because if you're attaching something thick to the wall, then this can handle anything up to, what's that, about 1 centimetre or something, that gap there. You don't want to be coming too far out of the threaded bit at the end. You can get all sorts of different size versions of these, ones that can handle much thicker things. This is great for just things like TV brackets. So we've got the depth gauge set. We'll keep that out the road. So I've vacuumed the dust away just to kind of stop the hole from getting blocked up. It is a good idea to vacuum out the hole itself. And then when it comes to actually fitting it into the hole, there's two schools of thought here. The instructions often tell you to take the bolt out, pop that in the hole, and then tighten it up. The thing that can happen though, I don't want to drop that in because I'll not get it back out. But what can happen when you do that is that the thread in the bottom of this can get all blocked up with debris out the hole. And if you get the thread clogged and then you start bolting into it and you start screwing it in and it gets stuck, it can be really, really difficult to get it back out if the thread gets jammed, and you can end up completely ruining your hole. So I prefer, if possible, and it's not always possible to do it like this, is put the bolt onto the thing that you're attaching onto the wall, then do up your bolt so that the thread in this bit at the bottom is completely covered by the bolt, and then it can't fill up with debris when you put it into the hole. And then you would put your whole assembly into the hole, your fitting and everything. You'll see I did that on a TV bracket that I was fitting that I've got on one of my videos. So then all you do, drop it into your hole, and you want that bit of the fitting there. Can you see that bit? You want that to be flush with the, in this case, the floor, but it would be your wall if it was going on a wall. So you just tap it so that that bit's roughly flush, or slightly below the surface is fine. And then you just tighten it up. So I'm going to use the impact driver here to tighten it up. That's already got it really, really tight, to be honest. But then I do like to get the actual socket on it because you can really feel how tight it is then. And I'm just going to give that probably an extra quarter turn or so. That'll do, champion. That isn't going anywhere. And this is another good thing, you know, if you're bolting machinery to the floor, these are a really good type of fitting to use for that sort of thing, as long as you're going into a concrete floor. But that won't budge. And obviously you can get these in any shape and size that you want to suit the machine that you're attaching onto the floor. If you do need to remove it, you can obviously just get your driver on and take that out, and that part will normally just stay in the hole. That wobbly bit is just kind of, there's a shield washer thing on the end there, but normally that'll just then stay in the hole. If you do have to get the whole fitting out, and by the way, as before, I would avoid taking this completely out, because sometimes, as I say, rubbish will get into the thread and you'll never get it back in again. But that should go fine. Let's try. There we go. Fine, not a bother. So if you do want to get the whole fitting out, can't always be done, but I'll show you what my approach to it would be. What you want is for this bit to decompress. So to get the fitting completely, the problem is as soon as you start pulling, it pushes this bit back into this bit and starts expanding again, and then you can't get it out. But what you want to do is decompress that bit. So you loosen the bolt, give it a little tap, and then gently start trying to pull the fitting out. If possible, what you want to do is try and pull it from this bit and not this bit, because as soon as you start pulling from that bit, that starts making it expand again and start gripping into the hole. You see, if I get this half out, watch this, just as a little demonstration, you see that's expanding again. So I'll give it a little tap. There. And we've got it, fine. But I'll show you, you know, you shouldn't do it this way, but you could do it just halfway in like that, watch. See, I reckon that'll take my full weight without it going down into the ground. You'll have to trust us that, look, my full 80 odd kilo of body weight is on that bolt, and it hasn't slipped down into the ground at all. In fact, let's just for a bit of fun. There you go. I hope you found that useful. Really heavy duty fixings, not for your average kind of pictures and stuff like that you're going to be putting on the wall, but fantastic for great big heavy things on solid walls. Big shout out as well to Robs101 on Instagram, who asked me to make this video. If you do want to get in touch and ask me a particular question, you can get in touch via Instagram or Twitter. Instagram is Gosforth Handyman, Twitter is Gosforth Andy, so you can follow me on those things. Obviously you can do the Patreon thing if you're interested in knowing about job pricing videos and all that sort of thing. You can go to gosforthhandyman.com and read articles about everything on this channel when I get a chance to update it. And what else? Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.